Welcome to the Deep Dive. We spent a lot of time on this show talking about the future of warfare in terms of hardware, the AI systems, the drones, the really advanced platforms.
Just shiny objects.
Exactly, the
Yeah.
shiny objects. But what happens to the human brain, to the people, when the machine takes over the tactical edge? Today, we are opening up a conversation that I think really challenges the very foundation of how the military, specifically the Army, builds its leaders.
It's a really foundational question because when your weapons system is autonomous, the most critical piece of infrastructure isn't the software, it's not the sensor package, it's the human command structure.
Right.
And we're doing a deep dive into a white paper called The Hollow Pipeline, and it delivers a truly revolutionary thesis.
I read it.
It argues that the traditional linear path to military command, the one built on decades of incremental physical experience, is now fundamentally obsolete. It's a casualty of algorithmic warfare.
Exactly. And this isn't just about, updating a training manual here and there. This is talking about a structural collapse. The sources are arguing that integrating autonomy and AI requires a radical, total overhaul of the entire leadership development model.
Right.
Moving from this, rigid industrial era progression to something that looks a lot more like a specialized, decentralized internal marketplace.
The central tension here is it's profound. The paper says that integrating autonomy, especially for these critical strategic roles, they mention manning the Eastern Flank Deterrence Line, the EFDL,
Okay.
that has a critical second-order effect on human capital. It just changes the required cognitive profile of every single person in the force, but especially those who are destined for command.
So our mission today is pretty ambitious. We are going to unpack the paper's most radical assertions. We need to get into why the Army might need to abandon this mandatory key developmental pipeline, the KD pipeline.
That's been sacrosanct for a century, the idea that there's a required sequence of jobs you have to do.
100%. And then we need to look at how they propose to fundamentally decouple technical training.
Yeah.
The ability to do something from professional culture, which is the shared identity.
The what from the who.
Precisely.
So just to set the table, let's introduce the three core concepts that they say define this whole transformation. First, you have the hollow pipeline itself. That's the institutional risk if we do nothing.
The bad place.
The very bad place. Second, the experience trap, which is this flawed assumption that, time spent equals competence gained. And third, the solution, the market-based talent architecture.
And that's all about prioritizing specialized expertise. And I think the term they use is cognitive agility over just raw tenure.
Exactly. This is a massive shift. So we're going to go deep into the mechanics of how they actually propose to make it all happen.
Okay, so let's unpack this. The first question we have to tackle is, why is this happening now? Why is this structural collapse an issue today? And it really comes down to this AI catalyst, and specifically the elimination of that entry-level leadership experience. This is where AI isn't just a force multiplier. It's a job eliminator for junior officers.
And the irony is just, it's so thick because the Army is automating away these entry-level tasks for entirely laudable reasons.
Yeah, to save lives.
To reduce risk to the soldier, exactly. Yeah. They're replacing the most dangerous, repetitive, entry-level tactical tasks with autonomous systems. But in doing that, they are simultaneously removing the sandbox.
The sandbox.
The essential proving ground where junior leaders traditionally failed, learned, and ultimately earned their professional legitimacy.
I mean, you just think about that classic image of a young lieutenant or a captain. Their whole proving ground is usually some high-stress, dangerous environment where they learn unit cohesion, leadership under fire, the basic mechanics of small unit tactics. If a machine is handling all those mechanics, where does that new leader get their grit? Where do they learn?
That crucible is it's gone. The source cites the use of systems like the sensor-fused buffer and killbox architectures. And to really understand why this hollows out the pipeline, you have to look at what those systems actually do.
So tell us more about those. I mean, what critical decision-making process is that junior lieutenant no longer performing?
Okay, so think about it this way. Previously, in a forward-deployed environment, a junior officer would be responsible for tasks like setting up recon, fusing intelligence from all these different sensors, human, electronic, and then navigating these really complex rules of engagement to confirm a target and, call for fire.
Well, the whole sequence of high-stakes decisions.
A sequence of high-stakes, real-time decisions that build confidence and tactical competence. Now, in a sensor-fused buffer, the AI handles the sensing, the fusing, the threat ID, and even the rules-based engagement logic. The system establishes what is basically a protective automated perimeter. And the killbox architecture, that's designed to deconflict air and ground fires automatically, based on real-time data, not some map overlay a human drew.
So the machine is making almost all of the time-critical, rules-based decisions.
The vast majority. And that means the human leader is no longer performing the fundamental tactical tasks that have defined the first, say, decade of their career.
So that first rung on the leadership ladder is just automated away. Which brings us directly to what the paper calls the industrial age anachronism of the current management architecture.
It is entirely predicated on this industrial age mailroom to CEO linear progression. The institution believes that to command a division, you absolutely must have done every single job below it, sequentially, over 20 or 30 years.
You start at the bottom, learn the skills for that era, and you just sort of float up the ranks over time.
It's almost gravitational. But if the skills you learn at the bottom are no longer relevant because a machine does them, then the whole structure is just producing highly ranked generalists who are experts in an obsolete form of warfare.
So it's completely ill-equipped to produce senior commanders for a force where the tactical edge is automated, and what you really need is digital proficiency.
This is exactly why the paper defines the experience trap. The institution just assumes a division commander must have successfully commanded every lower echelon platoon, company, battalion, brigade.
Right.
It's a definition that completely conflates the volume of time and the quantity of experience with the quality of strategic competency. The underlying belief is that, physical time spent in the mud somehow magically unlocks strategic synthesis.
This is the perfect moment for that historical counterpoint the paper provides, because it completely refutes that linear assumption. And it uses the example of Dwight D. Eisenhower. This is a real aha moment in the text.
It truly is. Eisenhower's path to command in World War II was the absolute antithesis of the experience trap. When the U.S. entered the war, Eisenhower was a brigadier general in a key staff role. He was in the War Plans Division.
The planner, not frontline commander.
A planner, a staff officer, an intellectual who had spent years studying the requirements of global mechanized warfare. He didn't have that deep, extensive tactical command experience of many of his peers, guys like Patton or Bradley, who had spent their entire careers meticulously climbing those tactical ranks.
Right.
And yet, when the moment came, Army Chief of Staff George Marshall did something truly radical.
He skipped them.
He valued Eisenhower's strategic synthesis and planning abilities, his cognitive skill set, so highly that he bypassed the traditional sequence entirely. Eisenhower went straight from a high-level staff planning role to theater commander.
Overseeing the largest Allied invasion in history.
Right. He was responsible for welding together all these disparate Allied forces, managing logistics across oceans, dealing with strategic-level friction. He was a strategic manager.
He skipped the tactical command experience entirely,
Yeah.
which, that demonstrates that strategic capability can be derived from intellectual study, from planning, from synthesis, not just from a linear progression through tactical ranks that might not even be relevant anymore.
That's the lesson. The skills Marshall needed were cognitive and political, not necessarily the grit you get from a tactical crucible.
And that's the lesson the paper wants the modern Army to internalize.
Absolutely. We need planners, architects, synthesizers at the top. Forcing some talented young systems architect through 20 years of irrelevant, automated tactical command experience might actually dull the precise strategic skills they need to lead an AI-enabled force.
The current system basically punishes the technical expert by demanding generalist experience.
It does. And if the Army fails to adapt to this reality, they face this existential risk the paper defines as the hollow middle.
Okay, so this is the worst-case scenario.
This is the absolute worst case. If we maintain this rigid structure while simultaneously automating away the core developmental roles, the sandbox, we produce a whole generation of leaders trapped in a hollow middle.
They're technically non-proficient because they didn't learn the modern digital ropes, but they're also culturally unprepared for high-level strategic decisions because their traditional developmental roles were just performed by machines.
So they become effective at neither the algorithm nor the strategy.
Wow.
They become great at managing a dwindling bureaucracy, but they're incapable of commanding a tactical cloud or even understanding the speed of machine-to-machine microorders. They are leaders trained for the war that just ended with no practical training for the war that is starting.
And the whole institution loses both its technical edge and its strategic synthesis capability. It makes the entire force brittle.
Brittle is the perfect word.
Okay, so we've established that the traditional experience pathway is eroding because of automation. Now, the paper suggests a mandatory separation of two concepts the Army currently treats as identical, and this is really critical to the reform, separating training from culture.
This is the crux of the diagnostic part of the white paper. We have to distinguish very clearly between the two. Training is the what?
The what?
It's the technical ability to execute a specific task. How to zero a rifle, how to clear a room, how to call for fire. And the paper is definitive on this. In the future force, these tasks are largely automated, or at least assisted by AI.
But culture. Culture is the who. This is the shared ethos, the professional identity, the shared understanding of hardship and purpose and loyalty.
It's the grit of the 82nd Airborne, right? The disciplined ethos of a Marine regiment.
Exactly.
And the paper is clear. The military must retain and nurture that culture. But you have to stop conflating that essential shared identity with the technical skills that a machine now performs faster and more accurately.
So the current structure demands that you acquire the technical training through the cultural crucible.
Yes. And the future must allow leaders to gain that cultural cohesion and identity without wasting decades mastering obsolete technical skills.
This whole issue is captured so powerfully in this metaphor they use of the procedural anchor. We're modernizing our weapon systems at this frenetic pace. You hear terms like agile acquisition, dynamic integration, but the human capital model is still weighed down by procedures that are, they're literally relics of the past.
It's institutional whiplash. The operational side is fighting at the speed of light, while the human resources side is moving at the speed of parchment. And that procedural anchor ensures that the command element, the most critical node in the whole system, is operating at a century-old pace, dictated by manual checks and balances designed for an era of slow communications.
And the very nature of command itself has transformed so radically that the leaders produced by the old system, they're just not prepared for the reality of a modern headquarters.
Absolutely not. The paper's analysis of a modern headquarters it's stunning. It's no longer just a collection of tents and radios. They call it a C5ISR, an edge compute hub.
Okay, let's define C5ISR for our listeners.
Yeah.
Because that is some highly technical military jargon.
It is. It stands for Command Control, Communications, Computers, Cyber Defense, Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance.
So
Everything.
essentially, yes. It is the entire nervous system of the fighting force, the integrated networked brain. The headquarters is now a physical building or a facility designed to manage just massive amounts of data flowing instantaneously.
So the commander is no longer just moving physical troops on a map. They are managing a massive data infrastructure.
Precisely. They are managing, and this is a quote, clusters of blade servers and machine-to-machine microorders.
Okay, what's a tactical blade server?
Think of it as a ruggedized mobile high-density server unit. It's designed to provide immense processing power right near the front lines at the edge of the network. So the commander's primary task is ensuring these servers are all communicating properly, integrating autonomous sensor data, maintaining the integrity of that data stream.
So a commander is effectively becoming a chief information officer who also has the authority to employ lethal force. That's a great way to put it. Yes, they are commanding an infrastructure problem. But, and here's the massive disconnect, we train the architects of this tactical cloud on obsolete manual tasks.
Give us the starkest examples the paper provides.
Forcing officers to draw static boundaries on paper maps, or manually deconflicting airspace using verbal commands over a radio. These procedures were necessary in the 20th century, but today, these manual procedures introduce fatal consequences.
How so?
The system is designed for speed and distributed data, but the commander's training forces them to inject these slow, analog steps right into the middle of a digital process.
And the core issue, as we've noted, is latency.
It is the killer. The training conditions leaders to rely on human verification and manual checks where machine speed execution is required. If you take the time to physically draw a boundary and confirm it manually with a distant unit commander, you have just introduced latency.
And this latency doesn't just slow things down, it creates a predictable pattern of life that an AI-enabled adversary is explicitly designed to exploit.
That is the ultimate risk. Adversarial AI systems aren't looking for weak spots in physical armor. They're looking for predictable latency in human decision cycles.
Wow.
If an enemy AI learns that, 90% of the time, confirmation of a target requires a 15-second human verification delay, that window is precisely where the enemy acts. The training instills a dangerous default setting delay for analog verification that leads directly to predictable, exploitable failures in an algorithmic war.
So you can't fight the future using a brain conditioned by the procedures of the past.
You can't. That procedural anchor is an active strategic liability.
Okay, so if the industrial age pipeline is obsolete, we obviously need a new engine. The white paper transitions here to its most radical proposal, shifting from a centralized, time-based rotational model to a decentralized, merit-based internal labor market. And it uses a really fascinating analogy to explain the necessary cognitive shift, the Ender paradigm.
Yes. Drawing on Orson Scott Card's Ender's Game it's brilliant because it captures the essence of remote algorithmic warfare perfectly. The core idea is that effectiveness in future conflict comes from the cognitive ability to manipulate the interface of war.
Not physical presence.
Not physical presence, not traditional leadership presence, not old-school battlefield experience.
So for those who haven't read the book, the protagonist, Ender Wiggin, is this young military genius who commands entire fleets in massive space battles, but he does it from a remote station through these hyper-realistic simulations. He never physically meets the enemy.
And that is the point. For the future commander using autonomous systems, the data stream, the network map, the simulation on the screen, that is the reality. The cognitive leap is understanding that the interface is the battlefield.
Your success is measured by your ability to synthesize data and issue microorders to clusters of autonomous systems.
Right. And the paper draws a parallel to the need for digital visual flight rules, or VFR. In aviation, VFR is what ensures pilots maintain situational awareness to avoid collisions. Well, in the algorithmic sky, the commander has to maintain safety and effectiveness through networked situational awareness, not through centralized, human-driven permission to maneuver.
And this capability,
Yeah.
it often resides more naturally in the digital native, right? The young officer who grew up speaking the language of code and networks.
But the current bias is so entrenched. The pipeline insists that this leader must trudge through the mud for 2 decades to earn the right to command the screen.
That insistence is fundamentally punishing the very talent you need the most. If a 22-year-old can intuitively grasp the complexity of algorithmic deconfliction, forcing them to spend 10 years commanding irrelevant infantry maneuvers it's a huge waste of genius and a strategic delay.
Exactly. The Ender paradigm teaches us that the best commanders for high-speed remote warfare are often those unencumbered by the biases of traditional infantry tactics. They instinctively get the algorithmic environment. The model has to stop penalizing this intuitive cognitive capability and start harnessing it immediately, regardless of tenure.
Which leads directly to the core structural change, abandoning the mailroom concept in favor of what they call the master gunner model.
The rigid 20-year ladder of generalist progression is a relic. It's a complete relic of the industrial age. The U.S. Army, as an institution, has to start reflecting the specialized meritocracy that defines the entire modern economy. Generalist expertise is now a drag on the system.
And the paper makes this brilliant historical pivot here, reclaiming a kind of pre-industrial flexibility.
It does. In the pre-industrial specialized age of warfare, sovereigns hired master gunners, these expert artillery commanders, for their specific high technical capability.
Like breaching a wall.
Exactly. The ability to effectively breach a specific type of fortification wall. They were paid and promoted based on that depth of expertise, not on decades spent as a general pikeman or a foot soldier. Their value was hyperspecific, measurable, and absolutely critical.
So who are the new master gunners in 21st century warfare? We need to define that specialization.
Well, they're the experts in fields like telemetric chains of custody and predictive sustainment. These are complex, data-driven specialties.
Okay, let's unpack those terms. What does telemetric chains of custody actually mean for a commander?
It's all about data integrity and trust. In algorithmic warfare, your sensors are autonomous and they're distributed everywhere. A commander has to trust that the data stream, the telemetry coming from some remote sensor, hasn't been spoofed or corrupted or intercepted.
So the master gunner for that.
The master gunner specializing in this ensures the chain of custody for that data is inviolable. This requires deep knowledge of network security, encryption, and AI pattern recognition to spot a malicious intrusion.
That is a world away from physical security and predictive sustainment.
That's managing the logistics of a global decentralized force using AI. So instead of manually tracking inventory, the system uses predictive algorithms to forecast maintenance needs for autonomous vehicles, anticipate supply chain failures, and then autonomously order and move resources before a human even realizes there's a shortage.
Wow.
The expert in this field manages that complex algorithmic movement.
So a division commander doesn't need to be able to perform these specialized tasks themselves.
Yo.
They just need to know how to synthesize the data and wield the capability that these master gunners provide.
Absolutely. Generalism is out. Strategic synthesis of specialized data is the new key to the executive suite. The system has to create pathways for these experts to reach high-ranking positions quickly, not in spite of, but because of their depth of technical skill.
Okay, so this shift to specialization requires a totally new operating system for personnel, and that's this rubric-based internal labor market. And it really means fundamentally restoring authority to the operational commander.
This is a critical philosophical shift. The paper argues we have to move away from these centralized personnel boards dictating assignments based on, generic block check evaluations.
Right.
The foundational principle is simple. A commander cannot be held responsible for a unit's performance if they did not choose the people in that unit. Responsibility has to align with authority.
And the most immediate necessary authority they need is direct hiring speed. The current system is just way too slow for algorithmic warfare.
The existing officer marketplace is an attempt at flexibility, but it's still burdened by this incredible bureaucratic lag months of centralized slating, boards, paperwork.
So what's the proposal?
Commanders need the authority to identify a specific talent needed, say, an expert in machine learning for target acquisition, interview them directly, and just hire them. The paper argues for a system where a commander can hire a candidate today and have them standing in formation saying good morning tomorrow.
That is the definition of market speed.
It is.
But with that authority has to come swift accountability, which introduces the, I think, very controversial concept of performance-based release.
This is where the paper gets truly radical. If a subordinate fails to meet the unit's specific technical or cultural standards, and this is key, specific standards, the commander must have the authority to fire them from the unit.
Not from the Army.
Not from the Army necessarily, but from that specific unit and that mission set.
Okay, wait. Let me pause here as the audience proxy. Isn't giving a commander the unilateral authority to fire someone from their unit a recipe for, I don't know, immediate morale collapse, favoritism, toxic, capricious leadership? I mean, this sounds like it could destroy cohesion overnight.
That is the immediate, obvious, and necessary challenge to this idea. And the white paper directly addresses this skepticism by introducing what it calls the brain drain filter as the core mechanism for internal policing.
The brain drain filter.
The marketplace itself is the corrective force.
Okay, tell us how that works.
In a true talent marketplace, high performers have agency. They can choose where they want to work. So units with toxic cultures, incompetent leadership, or unrealistic demands will suffer an immediate and very visible brain drain.
So the best people just leave.
The highest performers will exercise their agency and flee. They'll move to the unit with the better mission, the better commander, the better culture.
So the market force acts faster than any centralized bureaucratic oversight. A terrible leader loses all their best talent and is immediately exposed as ineffective, even if they never get a bad centralized evaluation.
Precisely. This competition for talent is seen as a faster and more effective filter for toxic leadership than centralized climate surveys, which can be manipulated, or inspector general complaints, which take months or even years. If your unit is hemorrhaging talent because you are a terrible leader, the market immediately identifies you as a failure and you fail quickly.
It's Darwinian pressure on the command climate.
It is, and they argue it's necessary.
Okay, that makes the system self-correcting, but what happens to the individual who is released? Does this just result in more officers being prematurely separated from the service? The paper seems to build in an internal safety net.
This is the humane aspect, and it's designed to retain specialized talent even if they are a poor cultural fit for one particular unit. Crucially, release from a specific unit is not immediate separation from the Army.
Right.
The individual enters a probationary period in the internal labor market. The paper suggests a period of, say, 90 to 180 days.
So they're free to shop themselves around for a new employer, but within the Army.
Correct. They retain their rank and pay, but they have to aggressively seek employment with a different unit that might be a better cultural or technical fit. The process separates chronic incompetence. So those who can't secure any new position without ending careers over personality clashes or poor technical alignment with one specific commander's style.
Separation only occurs if they fail to find a new job in that window.
Exactly. It filters the truly unsuitable while retaining specialized technical talent.
This would require a total revolution in how personnel are evaluated. You'd have to move from these generic assessments of potential to quantifiable standards. The paper calls it the compounding knowledge assessment model.
Right. We have to move past the generalized officer evaluation report that tries to assess everything from physical fitness to strategic thinking all at once. The new system relies on weighted rubrics measuring specific contributions to critical versus enhancing mission factors.
How would this rubric operate in practice? Can you give us an example of that weighting?
Sure. So for a leader destined for an algorithmic warfare command, say a cyber protection brigade, their critical factors are weighted extremely high. This might include demonstrably designing or managing automated deconfliction algorithms, understanding telemetric integrity, or successfully running a tactical compute hub. These are weighted at perhaps 80% of their evaluation.
And the enhancing factors.
Those would be the more traditional, but now less essential, skills barracks management, organizing the local holiday party, managing non-essential logistics. These are still valued, but they contribute a much smaller percentage, say 20%.
So the evaluation becomes hyper-specific.
Hyper-specific and tied to demonstrable skills needed for modern warfare. It ensures that the best technical minds rise, even if they aren't the best at traditional paper administration. The system evaluates you for the job you are doing, not for the job you might do decades from now.
So the proposals we've discussed, the master gunner model, the internal labor market, they're revolutionary. But they are entirely predicated on making fundamental changes to the bureaucratic and legal bedrock of the military. This isn't just doctrinal, it's structural.
Absolutely. The paper really stresses that this shift requires major changes to the Army's Title X management and the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ.
Okay, let's start with Title X. For those unfamiliar, what does Title X actually govern?
Title X is the section of the United States Code that legally establishes the organization, the structure, and the management of the armed forces. It dictates how promotions happen, how officers are managed, how many years they have to serve in certain capacities. Changing this means changing the law itself.
And the very first step under Title X has to be the decoupling of promotions from time and grade. This is merit-based progression in its purest form.
Right. If the system demands specialized meritocracy, then promotions have to reflect demonstrated capacity and skill depth, not linear tenure. If we find a 24-year-old who can demonstrate the capacity to design and manage the automated deconfliction algorithms for an entire theater airspace,
That person should have the rank.
that person should hold the rank commensurate with that authority.
So the idea of waiting 15 years to become a major solely because of time served is completely incompatible with a system where speed and technical expertise are mission critical. You have to empower the talent immediately.
That traditional concept ensures you wait for the generalist to be ready. The future requires the specialist to be ready now. The moment they acquire the capability, they must acquire the commensurate authority to wield it.
But decoupling rank from time served and moving technical experts up the ranks really quickly,
Yeah.
that creates a massive critical legal conflict. The paper calls this the issue of judicial independence.
This is the single largest bureaucratic hurdle because it touches on the very DNA of military command. Under the current structure, rank and command position are intrinsically tied to judicial authority under the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
And what does that link mean in practical terms for a commander?
It means the commander is also, effectively, a judge and a magistrate. A battalion commander has judicial power. They can convene a court-martial, they can issue non-judicial punishment Article 15s, and administer discipline. The legal authority to enforce military law is inherent to the command position itself.
So if we adopt this master gunner model, we might have these highly ranked technical leaders, say a lieutenant colonel who's an expert in telemetric custody, who has immense operational authority over systems, but zero practical experience or cultural background required to administer military justice.
That is the conflict. Do you really want your algorithmic architect, who may have spent their entire career isolated in a highly specialized lab, making decisions about the personal discipline of hundreds of troops? They may be technically superior, but culturally, they skip the rungs that teach them military legal administration and unit discipline.
They're unqualified for that role.
They're fundamentally unqualified to perform the legal function of command.
This is where I have to push back hard. If you have high-ranking technical experts who are not also judicial commanders, how do they enforce the cultural discipline needed to maintain a professional fighting force? I mean, doesn't this erode the moral authority of the chain of command itself?
That is a fundamental concern, and one the paper anticipates. The argument is that the moral and cultural authority must be derived from the cultural ethos and shared identity. That who we talked about in part 2, not merely from the bureaucratic power to convene a court-martial.
So authority has to come from demonstrated strategic competence and cultural alignment, not from the ability to impose punishment.
Exactly. And the paper proposes a radical but necessary solution: separate military justice authority from operational command.
Okay, explain the mechanism of this separation. How would that work?
The judicial functions would be centralized under a specialized legal branch. This would create a parallel judicial chain of command. A commander's sole focus would be on the staff fight, the high-speed management of data, autonomous systems, and strategic maneuver.
And if a discipline problem arises,
The commander flags it, but the judicial determination is handled by a separate legal command structure staffed by experts in military law.
which allows technical experts to advance based purely on merit without the burden of legal administration, which they may be fundamentally unsuited for.
It separates the responsibilities of the warrior from the responsibilities of the lawyer. It frees the commander to focus on the future fight, leveraging their technical expertise while ensuring justice is administered by professionals specifically trained in the UCMJ, regardless of their rank or operational posting.
It ensures that the speed of operational command isn't hampered by the requirement to pause and administer due process.
Which is a function that, while vital, must not inject fatal latency into the battle.
And practically, this structure ensures that the young, brilliant master gunner who needs to be promoted quickly to manage the algorithmic sky doesn't accidentally misuse their judicial authority, which they were never trained to wield.
It prevents a critical mismatch between technical authority and legal responsibility. The paper emphasizes this isn't about lessening discipline, it's about professionalizing the administration of justice and allowing operational commanders to focus exclusively on defeating the enemy at machine speed. #outro.
This has been a monumental deep dive into the sheer volume of change that might be needed to adapt to algorithmic warfare. We've navigated from the obsolescence of that linear mailroom to CEO concept through the crucial separation of training and culture and into this radical proposal for a specialized, market-based expertise driven by the Ender paradigm.
The conclusion is stark. It's unavoidable, really. The Army's traditional training concept is an artifact of a manpower-intensive past. The future is defined by, and I'm quoting here, least capabilities, algorithmic skies, and rubric-based assessments.
The traditional pipeline is just no longer viable for producing the kind of strategic synthesis you need for modern command.
And that's largely because the proving ground, that tactical sandbox, has been outsourced to autonomous systems.
By embracing the master gunner model and moving to an internal labor market that prizes technical merit over tenure, the military could build a leadership corps that's capable of wielding autonomous systems, rather than one trained only for the conflicts of the last century.
But as we've seen, this requires not just new doctrine, but fundamental changes to the law itself, specifically Title 10 in the UCMJ, to allow for that separation of operational command and judicial authority.
It's a painful, but, as the paper argues, necessary realization. The leader who can command the tactical cloud needs a totally different skill set and developmental pathway than the one who commanded a platoon in the last century.
The Army has to choose between tradition and capability.
So, here's the final provocative thought for you to mull over. If the military, the ultimate hierarchical institution, is seriously considering decoupling rank and authority from judicial command just to create a more agile and effective leadership structure, what does this master gunner model imply for other massive hierarchical and slow-moving institutions you encounter every day? Think about the government agencies or the massive corporations that still rely on 20 years of linear progression, doing every job sequentially, to vet their executive leadership. Does the merit-based specialization model hiring the technical expert for the C-suite, regardless of tenure, apply beyond the military?
That's a great question.
We'll leave you with that as you consider the cost of sticking to an obsolete pipeline.